Well, I think it's about time for another Worst to Best. This is one of my favorite video series where I get to really go deep and dive into a particular artist or band. And I mean, it's been a hot minute since I've done one of these, so yeah, let's talk about an artist that I just dove really deep into during the whole lockdown pandemic. And that is of UK artist Kate Bush. And Kate Bush is one of those artists that's really kind of hard to pinpoint the genre that she plays in. The closest that I can get to is like art rock, art, pop. Got her start in the very late 70s, really blossomed and exploded in the 80s, and essentially almost became the face of UK art, female-driven pop and rock. Now, a few caveats, the same ones that come with all of these. First of all, this is just my own opinion. I'm not saying that the first one I'm going to be talking about is the absolute worst thing on the planet. I'm not saying that the last one I'm going to be talking about is the absolute best. I mean, music can't be viewed upon completely objectively. There definitely has to be some subjectivity to that, and this is 100% subjective. So my list is going to look very different than your list. And essentially the way that I break it out in my mind is if I had all of her albums laid out in front of me, which one would I listen to last and which one would I listen to first? And that's how I do this whole worst to best. And Kate Bush is one of those rare artists that doesn't have a bad album. Like she has some albums that are definitely better than others, and that's the whole point of this list, but she never put out a bad record or a bad album. So just keep that in mind when I talk about the first couple of albums in this list. I think that's about it. Obviously, no EP. All right, well, I guess I'm not going to be having that side lamp on my, other part of the video. So this part of me is going to be in shadow. Sorry about that. But that's the breaks. Them's the breaks. So where was I? All right. So obviously, we're only going to be talking about EPs. Nope, let's try that again. Obviously, we're only going to be talking about LPs, full-length releases, no EPs, no live albums, no re-releases or anything along those lines. It's just the studio records that she's put out. So I think that's about it in terms of caveats, in terms of things that I really wanted to mention beforehand. I hope you guys just have fun with it. So without further ado, let's dive into Kate Bush's albums, starting with number 10. Director's Cut, released in 2011. Now, I actually struggled with putting this album on the list here because it is, in one sense, a compilation album, but the thing that elevates it beyond just the regular old compilation album is that it's essentially the reworkings of a lot of the tracks from the Sensual World and the Red Shoes. And a lot of this is even like re-recorded. So it's not just straight up, hey, here's the music from that album. No, they actually went through, polished it off, remixed, and even re-recorded quite a number of tracks for this. And so in that sense, it brings new life. And for me, it brings up enough new life that it could be considered its own studio record. And that's why I have it on this list. Because of that, it loses a lot of the artistic focus of the two other albums that feature most of the tracks on here, the Sensual World and the Red Shoes. The focus, the concept of those two albums are kind of lost in the fold when presenting these tracks on their own. Now, Kate and the record label and the record producers have done a very good job of kind of weaving a narrative through these tracks to kind of create its own identity, but it does kind of fall a little bit short of the narratives that are found on the other two albums. Now, the music that's being presented on here is quite nice. It is quite good. It does elevate a lot of those tracks that are found on those other two albums. It does provide a breath of fresh air in those sense, but when you remove those tracks from those albums, they do lack some of that luster. That's why I have Director's Cut as being the least best of her albums. Let's move on to the next one. Number 9. The Red Shoes, released in 1993. So I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of this one, and honestly, I probably like it a lot more than a lot of people out there. I found like this album took its time more than a lot of their other works to really blossom and really bring through. The thing that really kind of decreases my enjoyment of this album and why it's so kind of low on the list for me is the fact that it is a little all over the place. You know, the narrative flow on it doesn't quite flow a lot. There's a lot of start stops. There's a little bit of wandering the weeds, so to speak, on this album that kind of lessens the overall enjoyment of this record. But like, the individual tracks on here are still a delight and still a really, really good time. It is a little bit on the long side. You know, I think that's the biggest issue that I have with this record. It's probably about 3 to 4 tracks too long, but it's still a really great track. And it's one of those like rainy afternoon kind of an albums where I want a little bit more variety, but I don't want a complete variety show. So there you go, The Red Shoes. It's still a great time and one that I come back to quite fondly. Let's move on. Number 8. The Sensual World, released in 1989. The thing that I love about The Sensual World is how somber and how personal it is. I love how haunting a lot of the sounds are on this one, and it's almost ethereal in its presentation. You know, like it's so soft, it's so lush. It's almost like trying to chase a cloud at certain points. But because of this, there's this constant intangibility about it. You know, it's hard really to hang on to this album. Kate is doing an amazing job with her vocal range at this point in her career. Even though she's not hitting those high notes that she used to at the very beginning of her career, it still breathes this new fascination that's found within it. And I love a lot of the specific tracks that are on here as well, but it is one that I turn to not quite as often as a lot of her other works. I'm not 100% sure why. Like, it's one of those albums that I really do love a lot of those motifs and the expressions that are on here, but I also feel like this is one of the first safe albums that Kate put out, especially with some of the past albums having so much experimentation, so much like trying new things. This one doesn't really have a lot of that, and it's a little weaker because of that. It's a very safe album, so if you want a very safe introduction to Kate's work, this is a great starting point. So yeah, let's move on. Number 7. The Kick Inside, released in 1978. The one that started it all, her debut album. And don't get me wrong, this album is brilliant. It's beautiful. It's raw. And that rawness can be a detriment at times, but really it's so, I want to say, visceral in that sense. Like, there really wasn't too many other artists at this time doing what Kate had done with this album. It has the standout track of Wuthering Heights that everybody loves. I mean, those soaring vocals on this track is just mwah. I can't help but love it. But because this is her first one, there are a couple rough edges, there are a couple sharp edges, and if you're not ready for them, you might be drawn out of this album a little bit. But I love the artistic approach to this album, and I love how the sounds blossom throughout it. Yeah, I mean, there's not too much to say about her debut album. It's a really great kind of introduction to the world for Kate Bush, and it kind of got the world ready for more. So, yeah. All right, let's move on to the next one. Number 6. The Dreaming, released in 1982. Now, I also know I'm in the minority for this one. I love The Dreaming. You know, that's why it's practically at the midpoint in my list. I mean, it is kind of to that side of the midpoint. But I don't like it quite as much as a lot of other people. It is very strange. It is very, very strange. And part of me loves that. I love that experimentation. I love that changing and rhythms and like all the different experiments that she's trying on this one. Like, it really is an art rock piece of music. You know, where most of the tracks that have come before, they were pop art. They were like pop music first, art second. This one was the first that was like art first and pop second, you know. For me, sometimes those experiments don't quite work, and I do feel as though they're fleshed out in both previous and later albums. This is still a triumph in music, you know. A lot of people and a lot of producers point to this album as being a masterpiece, and I can't necessarily deny that. From a technical standpoint, from a producing standpoint, this album is immaculate. This album is amazing. But as a sit down and enjoy music, it can be a little challenging at times. And that's what really kind of draws me out of it a little bit, especially when I want to put something on, feel something, and get moved. I don't necessarily want to be challenged all the time. When I want to be challenged, man, I love this album. But when I don't, kind of rubs me the wrong way. So yeah, if you're looking more for like the artistic side of Kate Bush, this one is definitely up your alley, and go and check it out. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. Number 5.
Now I am falling.
50 Words for Snow, released in 2011. Okay, her last studio record up until now. I mean, who knows? She might have another one waiting in the wings. But for right now, this is the last one that she's put out. And honestly, I love this album, and it's such a shame that it doesn't have the same level of prestige as pretty much all her other works. I love how somber it is. I love how intimate this album is. Most of the tracks are really just Kate's vocals and piano. There's a little bit of guitar works here and there. There's a little bit of bass, a little bit of drums, but really at the end of the day, the two star performers are Kate and the piano, and it creates such a deep winter feel. Like when I am listening to this, like mid-February, like end of January, beginning of February, man, I get the warm, fuzzy feels. And this also has a lot of her longer stretches of music. A lot of tracks on here range from 7 to 10 minutes long, and it allows for that atmosphere to build, that impression and intimacy to really form. And I love the concept of this. I love both how snow is a solid, tangible thing, but if you get too close, it'll melt away and disappear. Beautiful, beautiful work. And honestly, if this is the last thing that Kate Bush really does, I applaud her for a solid career. This is a great swan song for her, and it's a great way to go out. So yeah, if you haven't heard 50 Words for Snow by now, please go and do it. It's just a brilliant, brilliant piece of work. So yeah, that's what I've got for 50 Words for Snow. Let's move on. Number 4. Lionheart, released in 1978. The follow-up album to her debut, the sophomore album, and where most artists struggle with the sophomore slump, this one definitely did not. It improved from everything that she had put down from The Kick Inside and ramped up her own personality. One of the things that I particularly love about this is it really showcases and spotlights her more intimate songwriting and her more constructing of atmosphere and moods within the music, like even from the first track of Symphony in Blue, I just feel transported to almost this new world. And I love the storytelling aspect that Kate has, especially on the second track of In Search of Peter Pan. But really, I can't say anything wrong about that last track of Hammer Horror, an homage to like the 40s to 60s, 70s like horror movies. Love that track, and I love the groove, and I love the oomph and punch to it. So this really showed like the combination and the blending of this ethereal, very whimsical, very like almost Feywild presence with a very concrete and very haunting aspects of it. Lionheart is a great, great atmospheric album, and pretty much from start to finish is a absolute treat. So yeah, that's what I've got for Lionheart. Great, great addition. Number 3. Hounds of Love, released in 1985. Okay, so I know that many would put this at number 1, and I could not fault you for doing that. And I love this album. I really, really do. This one has the big standout, the one that's making its round right now, of Running Up That Hill, A Deal with God. The thing that really puts this album so above so many of the other albums within her discography is the joy that's felt within this album. Like especially after The Dreaming, which was very dreary at times, like very challenging. This one has so much joy and so much presence on it. And that's one of the things that I really, really love. And it does kind of showcase and put the spotlight on some of the issues, you know, like some of the darker parts of life. So it's that balancing act that this album has. Not only does it celebrate life in its entirety, but it also kind of says, yeah, things are great, but here's how things are not so great. And I really, really enjoy those kind of aspects of it. So yeah, I mean, if you had a starting point for Kate Bush, this is definitely a very easy in. It gives you a full breadth of variety of what she's all about. And it really is one of the, you know, standout pieces for her. But still got two more, and once I reveal number 2, you'll automatically know what number 1 is. So, you know, through process of elimination, let's first talk about number 2, which is number 2. Ariel, released in 2005. The big comeback album. This was the one that came out, I think, with the biggest stretch of leg between albums, because the Red Shoes came out in 1993 and this is 2005, and then, you know, the director's cut and 50 Words for Snow came out in 2011. So anyway, a lot of time had passed between the Red Shoes, and the world was ready for more. And this was actually my first album from Kate Bush, and I actually picked it up the year that it came out. I still have the CD somewhere kicking around, and it really like grew the love that I had for her and her music. I love so many of the tracks on here, and what I particularly love is that this is a double album. I believe her only official double album. And I like that you have the Sky of Honey and the Sea of Honey. So the first album is much more of the singles. You know, you have King of the Mountain, Pie, Washing Machine, and you have like these big, very solid, very crunchy, very stand out, you know, kind of arena tracks, especially King of the Mountain. I feel like King of the Mountain and Pie are such a brilliant orchestration of sound and orchestration of music when you construct music in a singular fashion, like a singular form. Then the second album is essentially like 40 minutes worth of a single piece of music. The songs flow right from one into the other. Throughout, you have this concept of an artist that's trying to paint the afternoon during both a rainy and a sunny aspects of it, and trying to capture the mood. And so I love the fact that Kate both interposes all the different senses on here, because you have the senses, like the scent, like the smell of the landscape that she's putting forth through the narration of this artist, through the visual aspect, but you also have the aural, I can't pronounce that, the hearing aspect of it, with like this repetition of this bird, and like the birds communicating, and you're communicating with nature, and you're communing with the birds, and the birds actually forming words, and there's almost like this dance going on between this chirping of a bird and Kate's vocal works, and that back and forth is just so brilliant and so beautiful. But really, it's the last 2 tracks that I love off this album. Man, the crescendos and the build-ups, it's what I love as a progressive rock lover. This is what I go to when I want some good prog. And Kate is able to deliver on that sense. So if you haven't heard Ariel yet, please go and do so. It is an absolute treat, and one that, again, I will come back to. Like, it really did formulate a lot of my tastes in music in the latter half of the 2000s. Such a great work from a great artist. But we still have one album left to talk about, so let's get on to her number 1 album, which is number 1. She sang the letter Never Forever, released in 1980. I was, and I mean, I still kind of am, obsessed with this album. I just, starting from about like last Christmas all the way through, I spin this record maybe once a week or so. Just the way that the music flows from one track to another. Like, her third album, Never Forever, is just the standout, brilliant piece of music. Starting off with the banger that is Babushka. Man, I love this story. I love, again, showcasing Kate's storytelling aspect and her storytelling storytelling skills. There we go. Just the way that she's able to interpose that story aspect with the music that's going on there, and that visceral, like, almost sing yelling that she does on this track. Beautiful, beautiful work. And the thing that I love is, so we started off with a bang. Now we're flowing into the rest of the album, and it never lets up. It never really hits the pause button at any point. And I love how it just blends from one track into the other, into the other. You know, it's really hard for me to even begin to think of my favorite track from this, because this album for me is almost one complete section of music that I can't really splice them up into different tracks. But I love the last two tracks of Army Dreamers and Breathing. But maybe, I mean, with a gun to my head, I might say that All We Ever Look For is probably my favorite track off of this. It's so whimsical. It's so dreamlike. I love the interplay of like this footsteps and this wandering aspect, the bounciness that we have, and it leads right into Egypt. Again, brilliant, brilliant work. It is an absolute masterpiece of music. It's a staple of art as well. And it, again, this is the first album I would recommend to anybody if they're looking for an entry point for Kate Bush. It has such a dreaming aspect of it. It has such a beautiful quality to it. Love it. Absolutely love it. So that's why it's at number one. That's why it's at number one. I mean, I thought for sure Ariel was going to be my number one album from her, because I practically grew up with it. You know, I found so much of the different aspects of myself through that album, and I would have never envisioned that an album that is so entrenched in my own self, like my own understanding of me, wouldn't be the number one album, basically because during the lockdown, this was one of the other albums that really helped discover who I am. So yeah, absolutely love Never Forever. If you haven't already checked it out, please, please do. And that's what I've got. There's all of Kate Bush's albums. My own personal opinion, from her worst to her best. What do you guys think? How does my list compare to your own? Do you agree with mine? Do you disagree with mine? Please let me know of your own thoughts about Kate Bush's discography and how they rank and how you feel I represented them by commenting down below. And I think that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't, kick back and listen to the same Kate Bush, because, man, she deserves all the credit and all the praise. So, yeah, thank you for joining me on this journey. I had a blast. I hope you had a blast as well. And that's all I got. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.